Peace and power. Once again, this is Brother Sight coming at you with the Panther 48, coming out of San Diego, the chief of staff of the Black Panther Party. We have Brother Wall and a founding member of the Panther 48.
All power to the people.
And calling out of Florida, we have the Minister of Information and Meridius, Brother E, and a founding member of the Panther 48.
Words.
And that does not make your picture appear on the screen. And
Oh, can you hear me now?
there you go.
Okay.
And we have myself, Brother Sight, calling out of Texas, founding member of the Panther 48. Today, we're going to come to you with part two of the introduction to politics to go along with the series that we're building on to give the people a general understanding and a functional definition of politics. Today, we're going to deal with definitions. We call this section GOD, Gaining Understanding of Definitions, and we're going to explain and build on a lot of political terms. Uh, One of the things that I recognized back when, I forget what year it was, when Senator Bernie Sanders was running for the Democratic nomination for president, they was on the news and they was polling a lot of citizens because he called himself a democratic socialist. So they was asking the people, what's socialism? What's socialism? And it was clear that the general public had no idea what socialism was whatsoever. They had no understanding whatsoever. So it's very important for us to do a little vocab rehab and try to understand some of these political definitions. So that's what we're going to go through a little bit in the next couple of videos we do in this political series. So starting off, I'm gonna give you a definition for the word propaganda, because we hear that word a lot, and a lot of times people don't understand what that word means. According to Webster, Webster tells us that propaganda is the spreading of ideas, information, or rumor for the purpose of helping or injuring a cause, or institution, or a person. So basically, you have negative propaganda and you have positive propaganda, depending on what the intention of the propaganda was and who is putting the propaganda out. For an example, I'm gonna give a quick, simple example. If a community-based organization creates a community newsletter with the purpose of educating the community about the goals of the organization and the purpose of the organization, that community newsletter becomes what's called positive propaganda. Now, let's say on the flip side, that if a government institution or some major businesses decide to put out false information, lies, negative publicity out on their community organization, then that becomes negative propaganda. Now, I think Brother Ward would probably build on this and give you a little deeper understanding of the term propaganda and how it has been used historically against community organizations. Brother Ward, would you like to expound on that a little bit?
Yeah, the first thing I would like to say in regards to propaganda is just the word itself in terms of how it's manipulated and misused. Because oftentimes, especially as it applies to propaganda that's been targeted on grassroots organizations like the Black Panther Party, the New Black Panther Party, People's Black Panther Party, or Panthers in general, or Black movements in general, is that the information is typically came across as if it's informational or fact-based information. And so from that standpoint, a lot of times the listening audience and the public is not actually seeing this as actual targeted propaganda meant to destroy or bring down the organization. They just actually see it as if someone is doing an editorial or doing a publishing for your information on an organization, not realizing that there was a motive behind the intent and the way the information was portrayed, as well as a lot of oftentimes statistics to be added to the propaganda or to the quote unquote misinformation in order to skew the actual concept and the importance that that organization is having, an impact that it's having within the community. So the thing about propaganda is the word play itself in terms of how the information is distributed to the public, the general masses. Often the people are misled in terms of what the nature is of why this information is even being promoted. And from that standpoint, as a result of propaganda, as a result of dealing with the machine that actually has more media coverage, more resources, the organizations have find themselves in a position to where they have to spend more of their actual community time that should be going toward empowering the people to actually trying to fight the reputation or try to fight against the negative propaganda. So from that standpoint, this is why it's always important as it applies to propaganda to make sure you do proper fact finding, you know your historical significance, you are in touch with the community, have your post to the community so that when people get this misinformation, it is as plain as day that it is skewed and falsified. Even oftentimes the same thing may happen within the context of organizations. For instance, and I got to drop this out there because it's one of the things that always pissed me off, so to speak. Back when the New Black Panther Party, when we were part of the New Black Panther Party, we did the protest in Jasper where we was armed, and we had certain key members that were told to chamber around, and everyone had um, loaded rifles and shotguns. By the way, even our own Final Call newspaper took some information off of the AP and actually just cut and paste that information in their newspaper and published it as information. And what they published was that the New Black Panther Party goes into Jasper with weapons without any ammunition in them. And this actually came from the AP, and they just cut and pasted information. So oftentimes, even the people that we want to trust in terms of delivering righteous information will fall victims to propaganda and fall victim to putting out misinformation. And that's the power of misinformation, that it typically is able to spread faster than progressive and positive information. This is why you find the news stations the way they are in terms of sensationalism and stories in the first place. People have been bred to accept and go propaganda as it applies to, I would call, trauma and drama type of information. So the general public has been geared to want to be messy, has been geared to want to hear, negative reports or sensational reports. And so from that standpoint, oftentimes propaganda is drifted and skewed to try to create this sensationalized story instead of just flat out telling the truth and delivering the facts. That's all I
Well,
have on that.
well, indeed, I'm gonna add to that just a little bit because it's ironic you brought up that when the Final Call newspaper did that, because that little piece of misinformation and negative propaganda utilized for the purpose of discrediting the New Black Panther Party, that was something that lasted for years. The entire time I was incarcerated, every unit I hit, every time I hit a unit, somebody would ask me, "Why did y'all go through Jasper with no bullets in your guns?" This is what people ask me everywhere for 17 years. Anytime I hit a new unit, somebody would ask that question. Yes. And I would have to explain to them propaganda, explain to them. You tell me you read Malcolm. You tell me you read Malcolm and you love Malcolm so much, because I was dealing with brothers that had been incarcerated a long time and that was studying Malcolm, studying Huey, doing the studies. And Malcolm tells you you got to be very, very careful when you're dealing with this media, because the media would have you loving your enemy and hating your friend. You say you understand what Malcolm's teaching, but you trusted the news media with no problem whatsoever. But that's all I wanted to add to that. Brother E, did you want to add anything before I move to the next definition?
Oh, I suppose. Uh, so for me, propaganda is. I always liked propaganda because I never saw it in terms of a judgment, so to speak. Uh, good, bad, whatever. Propaganda is simply, using information to sway an opinion or whatever, for better or worse. The party uses propaganda. The U.S. uses propaganda. It's like technology, anything else. It's the application that determines whether it's quote unquote good or bad. But I like watching propaganda, whether it's um, the multi-million dollar mega preacher in the church propagandizing from the pulpit so he can get that new private jet, or it's the so-called media, mainstream media. It's not journalism anymore that waged a propaganda war against Trump, saying that he was basically a Russian operative, even though the same deep state, CIA, FBI, all of them um, did multiple investigations, released more than one report stating that there was no evidence to that fact. And these are people that didn't like Trump, wanted Trump out, but they had to come out and say, yeah, there's nothing there. And still, even to this day, the media uses the propaganda of the Russian Trump thing. At the same time, media ignores Joe Biden's son having received money from Russian oligarchs, having gotten a position of power in I believe it was a bank in whatever the name of that country is, not Bulgaria, the country that Russia took Crimea from, supposedly, um, and giving them access to then Vice President Joe Biden. The media is completely ignoring that story. Whether it's the school books that we use, whether it's the commercial for Coke or Pepsi, whatever information we're receiving, that's propaganda. Whether it's there's a documentary called The Corporation that I think everybody should watch, but it talks a bit about product placement. You know, we've all seen. There's a news show that I like to watch from time to time in the mornings, and they always have a Dunkin' Donuts cup sitting on the corner of their desk. You know, Dunkin' Donuts is obviously a sponsor. They paid for them to have that cup because it's there every single fucking time I watch the show. But even more than that, when you're walking down the street, we're used to the billboards and, you know, the marquees, McDonald's signs, and pictures in the window and all of that. But if we're walking, say, into a library and there's this FedEx box sitting next to the door, you think, oh, well, they just got a shipment from FedEx. Maybe that box was just put there to put FedEx in your mind, to propagandize you to FedEx, to give you this advertisement. So there's propaganda every time we're awake, and even when we're asleep a lot of times, especially those of us who have TVs on in our bedrooms or sleep with the TV in the living room or whatever, the music we listen to, everything is propaganda, everything, because everything is information. And more likely than not, more times than not, that information is coming from a source that is attempting to sway your opinion, especially in a capitalist system, because capitalism has one of the key needs for capitalism to work is it has to create a constant want in the people. People have to constantly want. If people stop wanting the new car every year, auto industry has a problem. If people stop wanting tennis shoes every year, or every time a new pair of Jordans comes out or whatever, the sneaker, Nike and them, they have a problem. So it constantly has to create this desire in the people, and the way they do it is through propaganda. So it's one of the reasons I like driving through the country so much is there aren't any billboards in the back roads when you get away from the cities. There are no McDonald's signs along the road. You know, when you become aware of it, you're aware of it. And so a lot of times getting away from it so that you can turn it off and you don't have to consciously ignore, you know, be aware of, okay, there's a sign. I'm aware of it, lessen the effect. So I'm not being, you know, manipulated in that way. So yeah, everything is propaganda. So we always have to be aware, situational awareness, being aware of our surroundings and what it is we're being told we like, because most of the stuff we like, we don't really like. We've just been told we like. We don't want the shit that we think we want. We've just been told that we want the shit, but we're not aware of it. And most times than not, our egos are way too big to admit that, because it puts somebody else in control. And we all like to think that we're in control of what it is we do. But propaganda is, for me, it's the weapon, period. You know, from Hitler to the Russians to the US, propaganda was the number one tool for everything. Everything rested on how well they propagandized the people. So there you
True
go.
indeed. And another good idea to keep in mind when dealing with propaganda is that propaganda is not always the marketing of certain things, but it also a word can be propagandized because what we got human beings think in ideals, and a word, I mean, and a word is nothing more than a symbol for an idea. When you see when you see a word like you see the word or hear the word woman, automatically the ideal or your ideal of what a woman is will come to mind. And you hear the word car, a truck, or whatever, the ideal that's attached to that word will come to mind. So when uh, uh, those in power propagandize certain terms or words, then when they can put that word on a group or a person, then it automatically turns you against that group or person. Like when they propagandize the word terror or terrorism or a term like the war on terrorism or the war on drugs or the war on crime. These words, when you hear, are racist. When they tell you that Farrakhan is a racist or Malcolm X was a racist, when you hear this term, because the term has been so propagandized, you hear it and you automatically say, I don't like Malcolm X. It was many times I was incarcerated with brothers that didn't know a thing about Malcolm, never read anything about Malcolm. They would say, Malcolm is a racist. I say, tell me one racist named Malcolm said he couldn't tell you anything about Malcolm. They just know that they had been told Malcolm was a racist. And then when they get introduced to some of Malcolm's ideas and concepts, then they realize how confused and lost that they were when dealing with propaganda. But anyway, I'm gonna move on, and I'm gonna move on and deal with the terms that quote unquote identify this government. So the next term I'm gonna deal with is democracy. Now, basically, the word democracy literally, it's a Greek word that literally means government by the people. So ideally, what a democracy is it's supposed to be the overall idea that the supreme power of the government rests in the people. And this type of government, the people exercise their power through representatives who are periodically elected. Again, you got to keep in mind this is only a concept because for a government to truly be ran by the people themselves would have to have a functional education and understanding of politics, and we don't have that. The average person in this society does not have a proper political education. So really, we have a government by the few. But let's build on the ideal of the concept of democracy a little bit. Uh, Brother E, Brother Ward.
I go ahead and go. Well, when I think about democracy, to me, it goes into a system that is designed to where the people have the ability to will their opinion and their rights to form and decide how the government is supposed to operate and how they will be governed, so to speak. And so, to me, when you think about a democracy, basically it is stating that the way things are designed, the people themselves determine how power is going to be structured. In other words, everyone or a body of people have the say so, versus dealing with a type of parliament or something where you're dealing with an elite class or select class of people that are always in power in hierarchy. So a democracy is giving and granting the right to the citizens of that governing body to decide on the process itself. And I think a lot of times where we get hung up on that is how that right will be exercised. For instance, from a democratic perspective, say the people decide that they want to deal with an election, and then that specific position that has been decided upon, that person at that term has been granted to power through democracy or through the democratic system to now appoint some people. So what you end up having is you end up having a situation where the people have raised or propped up people to operate on their behalf, and as a result of that, now that person can turn around and use that to their benefit and manipulate the system a little bit more and start now dealing with the appointment aspects, and then that becomes the norm and that becomes part of how the process is exercised. So from that standpoint, you know, when you talk about the ability for the people to determine their destiny and the ability for the people to determine how they will govern themselves, to what degree do you break that down, and to what degree do you exclude a certain percentage of the population? Who determines that? And I think as you deal with larger and larger populations, it gets more and more convoluted, which is, you know, even why you start dealing with the point of the need to have a judicial system that determines how laws will be applied. So that's my take on that.
Well, if brother, you don't want to add to it, I'm gonna move to the republic.
Well, the U.S. has never been a democracy. You know, even, and I know you're about to define republic and all of those things, but you know, y'all sing along if y'all know the words. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic
Yes.
for which it stands, not to the democracy for which the republic, because the founding fathers, if you read the Federalist Papers, never intended for even regular white trash people to rule this country. They didn't believe that the average cat had the intelligence to rule themselves. So they were elitist as hell. But even if you take that out and say, okay, whatever, you remember, Black folk on paper have only had the right to vote since 65. So up until 65, this wasn't a democracy, because the people, human beings, people, didn't have the right to rule, didn't have the right to vote. White women didn't get the right to vote until in the 20s or 30s or whatever, women's suffrage and all of that. So even by that standard, before the 1900s, early 1900s, the US was not a democracy ever. But we've been propagandized. Oh, it's a democracy this and democracy that. No. Democracy, everybody votes on every damn thing, period. That's what a democracy is. Republic, you elect somebody to go and vote for, to go and decide for you. That's what they do. That's what is done here. This is a fucking republic, but we've been propagandized to believe in this fantasy of democracy, which never existed. It never existed for all the people. It never existed for all the white people. It never existed for all the white male people. So by no definition is this country ever been a democracy. But we go along with it because we've been propagandized to believe it so, because we want to say, oh, this is the world's oldest democracy. Bullshit. It's not.
True indeed. I couldn't have said that better myself. You kind of took away from the next definitions breakdown a little bit, but that's all right. That's all right, though. That's all right. To do a little history real quick, just a little quick history. As E said, E is 100% correct. Matter of fact, the so-called founding fathers of this country never even meant for it to be partisan. They never meant for there to be these different parties, political parties in government. The first or one of the oldest party was as he talked about the Federalist Papers, was called the Federalist Party, and I believe it was organized by Alexander Hamilton, and it was based on the concept that he believed in united and extreme federal regulation dealing with the country to make sure that there wouldn't be too much division. Then as a combat to his concepts, I think it was Thomas Jefferson who organized the Democratic Republican Party. That was the original name of that party. And then I forget who it was with him that beefed with him over certain ideas. And then they split because the Federalist Party had ended by this time. So they split, and the quote unquote Republican Party took up the banners of the Federalist Party and just simply renamed it the Republican Party. And that's how we got this two-party system. But as he said, and as he just quoted your what was that? What was that? That ain't the Star Spangled Banner. That was the what was that you just quoted?
Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge of Allegiance. Hell, I ain't said the thing in so long, but
I haven't either. Third grade. No.
Edit this out. That y'all don't know the pledge.
Allegiance, according to the Pledge of Allegiance, this is a republic, and the definition for the word republic is a form of government in which supreme power is held by a body of citizens who have the power to vote for representatives in government. This type of government is led by a chief of state who is not a monarch. So in truth, we are dealing with a republic. And later, not in this particular video, but later in the next video, we're going to break down and give a deeper understanding between the concepts of the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. Next, and this is what this country is actually classified as a democratic republic. That's what it's actually classified as. And it's supposed to be a mixture of both ideals when dealing with governing this society. Over time, America claims to have morphed into the Democratic Republic. And this is the type of government with a mixture of those different ideas based off those who was in leadership having different interpretations of the Constitution. Also, they had major differences between the two groups and the ideals and what role government was supposed to play in business and private life and economic policy. And that's what created these two-party systems and created what we call, or what we live in right now, as a democratic republic. Now, unless y'all want to build on that, I'm gonna get a definition for what a party is, because we hear so much about the Democratic Party or the Republican Party or the San Diego Black Panther Party. As Brother War has behind his head over there. Did y'all want to build on that Democratic Republic a little bit?
No, go ahead.
All right. Now, party, I'm going to read the definition for party. This definition comes from the BLA Political Dictionary. A party is a group of persons organized for the purpose of determining government policy. A group taking one side of a dispute. In America, one of the ways of getting numerical support for a particular interpretation of political ideas is to form a political party. Once this is done, people who agree with the party's line can join. The party's line is the party's ideology, can join the party and work to strengthen the party's position. The oldest party in American politics is the Republican Party. This is why the Republican Party is called the GOP, or the Grand Old Party. And this is why even why the Black Panther Party chose to use the term party, because the party had a certain ideal or a certain concept that they believed needed to be expressed in the political arena. And keep in mind, when I say political arena, I'm not talking about, as we said when we first started this series, the average masses of the people think when we say politics, we're talking about voting for a president. When we say politics, we're talking about voting for somebody to be in public position. And when we're talking about politics, we're simply talking about the organization of society and the means in which people manage their personal affairs. That's what we're dealing with when we're talking about politics. Any of you brother want to add on to this?
No, sir.
Yeah, I want to add on just to further elaborate on the definition. I look at it as a group of people organized to acquire and exercise political power. So when you talk about, for instance, the Black Panther Party, from that standpoint, now you go into what's referred to as the 10-point platform, or the platform period as it applies to a party, are basically the things that they're going to organize and build around for the sake of political, instituting political or self-determination as it applies to the party. So that's why the 10-point platform of the party started off with saying we want freedom and we want the power to practice self-determination to determine our destiny. So from that standpoint, the concept of party was basically us coming together as a people, which is where you get all power to the people from, and establish the ability for those people to govern themselves, or those people to take part in how they operate. And to me, that even goes back to the fact that, for instance, in the United States, where when you dealt with segregation, you dealt with pockets of Black communities who were implementing power within their own community, establishing themselves, determining their destiny, growing being in control of their own resources in their own land, as it applies to that. And then all of a sudden, you have outsiders of European interests that come in and destroy those neighborhoods and destroy the wealth that has been generated and built up. Well, that goes back to taking away the power that they had. So from that standpoint, you can even look at what happened within Loudoun County, Alabama, where they used the symbol of the Black Panther Party. It had to do with getting the people to exercise their quote unquote rights as it applies to the Constitution at that point, and deal with, hey, being involved in the people that we want to serve us in government. So the symbol of the panther, as well as the concept of the party, goes back to getting the people, I would say, basically educated on their rights and their abilities to stand up and make change within a political system. And so party is a tool for that. So, but it's about getting the people involved in greater measures than just simply voting. And from that standpoint, if they're just voting, they're not really taking part in the true aspect of the political process. They're doing is just dealing with those people that have already selected themselves in a certain position. And at this point, they're just winning favoritism, which goes into the whole propaganda piece that Brother E was talking about. But dealing with all power to the people as it applies to the Black Panther Party or a Black Panther, it's about the people themselves governing their environment and dealing with self-determination. So we're taking that to a higher step than just simply talking about, dealing with things on a state or national level as it applies to the conglomerate. We're talking about, as a people, we want to empower ourselves and we want to politicize ourselves to where we know what it means to be self-governed and to free ourselves from the shackles of oppression and slavery. That's all I got on that.
See it. Would you better say something, brother E?
Mm-hmm.
And see I think this is important to understand. E talked about it a little earlier. He expressed this a little earlier. The so-called founding fathers of this society never meant for the average person to have any true political power. But they understood this. They understood human psychology enough to understand this. The best way to rule people is to make them believe that they're free, is to make them believe that they have political power, make them believe that they have a choice. So you have to create the propagandized idea that you live in a democracy, a government by you, and that your voices are heard. But to make sure that that voice is never truly heard, you have to miseducate the people intentionally so that they never truly have political power. Now, the problem with that is that
or propagandize the people.
exactly. Now, the problem with that is that in any society and any time throughout our time on this planet, there will always come a small group of people who will understand what's going on a little bit better than the masses will. A small group of people will always, for some reason, wake up, so to speak. And that's kind of what the Panther Party represented in this time. That's what Malcolm and his contemporaries represented in his time. That's what Marcus Garvey represented in his time. At all times, there will be people that will realize that, hey, we're being had, we're being played. And what they'll try to, what these groups of people will attempt to do is to re-educate and politicize the masses of the people so that they can bring the power of politics back into the hands of the people. And this has been the constant and the consistent struggle throughout our time in this society. Now I'm going to get ready to bring this video to an end because we have a whole lot more to build on. Our next things that we will touch on will be a breakdown of the Democratic Party and the Republican Party and the major differences between them and basically why they quote unquote beef with each other. Then we're going to end up building on many political ideas as it pertains to the Black liberation movement itself. But so if you're interested in those ideas and those concepts, stay tuned with the Panther 48 and make sure that you participate in this political education introduction to politics series. Anybody have anything to say before we sign out?
Sounds good to me.
I just want to say all power to the people. All power to the people.